quindi la grandezza. Ecco. Io direi, visto che siamo un leggero ritardo, chiederei a chi è a casa di togliere sia il microfono che il video, per piacere, che così mettiamo in evidenza più il professor Lash. Dear professor, thank you for being here with us on the web, not here, but with us on the web. I ask you to speak as slowly as possible during your speech, because I don't know how many people is skilled in English. So please speak slowly, and then at the end of your speech, the question will be in Italian and translated in English for you. Quindi alla fine del suo discorso, chi vuole fare domande, presente o da fuori, le farà in italiano e poi gliele tradurremo con relativa traduzione conseguente. Ok, thank you.
Good, excellent. Thank you very much for inviting me over and for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure. May I double check just to make sure I don't go on for too long? How much time should I take for the presentation, and roughly how much time would you like to have for questions?
Half an hour for the presentation and a quarter for the questions. It's okay for you?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Actually, I had planned for less, but Ulpiana, as you know me, I can always speak for much longer and much more so if I have to speak slow, because usually I'm a very, very quick speaker and students all the time complain about that. So I will try my best to speak slow this time around.
No worries. I mean, take your time, and yes, if it's at least 30 minutes, it will be fine.
Sure. Okay, thank you very much then. I will share my screen.
We see your screen now. Maybe
excellent.
In the presentation. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, there we go. Excellent. So as you see, my main topic is about responsible management. So it shares the responsibility part with corporate social responsibility, which I understand your group is more interested in. So I think this should be sufficiently relevant and hopefully interesting for what you're doing. And particularly in that context of, you see, it doesn't say COVID here, right? So I would like to broaden, to open up the topic a little bit and talk more about what do those responsibility topics mean, and how could we do responsibility in business and in management in that age of grand crisis that we're in. So first thing I will try to do will be to actually establish and to hopefully convince you that we are living in an age of grand crisis. So it's not just about COVID, but it is about the times that we're living in, and the question, what was before COVID and what will come after COVID, and what does that mean for our responsibility in business and management? So just a couple of examples. For instance, this really interesting blog set that I read the other day about how right now we're actually in a triple crisis already. So it is not only the COVID crisis, but also with the COVID crisis, there's an economic crisis coming, and at the same time we are right in the middle of the climate crisis, of course, as well. And people might argue that the climate crisis doesn't seem as pressing, it doesn't affect our personal lives as much as COVID does, but still I would say it is ongoing, and but it might even become much stronger than that. And I very much like this this image here, which I think expresses very well that kind of what I meant before with that age of crisis. So COVID will be that wave, then, well, the recession is coming after it. Well, then we've got something that might be much more impactful on a planetary scale, which might be climate change. If we have a biodiversity collapse, which seems to be a very likely thing to happen, that goes even beyond just the direct extreme weather events of climate change. It might actually make our entire food system go away and make dysfunctional for a very long time. So those are things which are even much bigger potentially than the COVID crisis, and which are very close to us, possibly in a very likely scenario. And then, well, of course, people keep going with it, looking at the instability that we see coming from all of those crises. There might even be something that we fear more, and which we haven't had since the Second World War, at least on a global scale. So what does that mean? It really means that there is no after the crisis. I was meant to write up an essay for Academy of Management, Learning and Education, which is a big management journal, as the name says. And the topic I was given was, tell us how is responsible management, what is responsible management be like after the crisis? And then while we were discussing the development of that essay, we realized, well, there isn't really any after the crisis. First of all, because COVID is ongoing, it seems to be here to stay, not in the form how we've seen it, but it seems to be something that will linger on for a very, very long time. But also there is no after crisis, because the next one of those is likely to hit very, very soon. So this changes the scenario very much, because it changes it from the crisis being the exception and how we're doing responsibility in a crisis being something exceptional, towards the crisis actually being our normal status quo. So this also means that we need to do responsibility as if crisis is something normal, because crises appear to very likely be much, much more normal than they ever used to be before. So, and that's really a big welcome to the Anthropocene. I don't know, probably many of you have heard that term before. So this realization that actually humanity has become a force on Earth that is able to alter how the planet works. So we are actually able now, because we are that force and we're not always behaving very well, we're able to make our own crisis. Climate change being a very good example, but also if you think about the different refugee crises, we made them. If you think about the potential biodiversity collapse, that's all something that we made. We make our own crisis. It's not the meteor that hits from the outside. It's us. But this also means that, and that's a very interesting article from Nature, from the big science journal, where they talk about the great acceleration. So it's not just something that I'm making up here, it's something that is recognized as a dynamic that we're going through, that there will be a great acceleration of crisis coming once again at a always quicker speed. So that means that stability is really something that we shouldn't take as something that's normal, but rather that kind of crisis mode is the normal one that we should be managing in. And yeah, I've got a question for you. This is a visualization of how big transitions typically happen, and my colleague Frank Giels, who has been doing a lot of work on that topic of transitions, he has this one dynamic where he's saying, well, there might be all the way up there this what he calls landscape shock. So the shock would be our COVID crisis, for instance, but the shock also would be extreme weather events from the climate crisis, but the shock would also be a collapse of the food production system from biodiversity collapse. So that shock, it opens up everything that we take for granted. So it opens up our policies, it opens up our culture, how we live. It makes certain technologies redundant, or further certain technologies like the web technology, the digitalization that has been speeded up by COVID. So it really shakes up everything. And then we do have certain things that we're already able to do, certain innovations that just exist in niche so far, in very small pockets, but they're not the mainstream thing. But because we get it all shaken up, actually those niche innovations, they can very, very quickly move up there into that regime, into that mainstream, the normal way of how we do it, and become the new normal. So my question for you here is, what do you see in that image? Do you think that's good? Do you think that's bad? What does it mean to you? Maybe if I hope we have a way of maybe getting one or two comments. Could be in the chats as well. It could be from the people I see sitting there in front of the screen. It could be from anybody in the room. What does that mean for you? Sorry for putting you on the spot here.
For Claudio, is a mess.
It's a mess, right? So I assume you don't like messes, Claudio. Do you like mess? Is that a good thing or a bad thing if it's a mess?
Sorry, Oliver?
Is it a good or a bad thing that it is a mess?
It's a bad thing.
Bad, okay. Does anybody see anything good in that mess?
For me, honestly, the first word that came into my mind is a word that maybe it's a little bit used too much in recent time, but it's resilience.
Mm-hmm. Well, so resilience would basically what in my understanding would be that we're bouncing back, right? So we are able, although we get that shock and we have a lot of chaos, we're bouncing back in a way, and it becomes normal again. It becomes stable again. Okay, so that's something positive, I assume. What kind of do you think we will bounce back? Will it be just the same as it was before?
No, it's impossible, but at least some characteristics are preserved. So not the same, but with the same characteristics, with main characteristics that remain the same.
Right, yeah, and that's partly how I see it as well. So I think some of the things have just been shaken up, but they're going to fall back in place where they were before. But others, particularly where we do have new things, new innovations coming from down there, from those niches and becoming mainstream, like we have that very strong digitalization now, which was on the way already before, but which has been accelerated so much because of the COVID shock. There we will also see that there will be certain changes that stay. So what I actually see is something very, very positive in here. I see an opportunity. Because right now, if you're thinking about sustainability, if you're thinking about responsibility, if you're thinking about how we think businesses should and could operate to be more socially, environmentally responsible, to be more sustainable, maybe even to be restorative, then we have an opportunity right now. Because many of those practices, which are still quite unique, which are practiced in niches, maybe you as an association interested in CSR are doing some of the more unique, interesting, innovative things, but the mainstream doesn't do it. So I think right now we actually have a huge opportunity, because the system is so shaken up, to slip in there and actually to promote some of those innovative practices, which are better than what we've doing before, and to help them become part of the mainstream. So this is where I see one of the opportunities. The other opportunity, and this is very, very present in this the Sarkis paper, which I cite here on the screen, is that they actually studied how the COVID crisis and how the disruption to supply chains in the COVID crisis actually can help us to learn for the climate crisis. So how can we reorganize supply chains to become more CO2 sustainable or even restorative in some cases, because the supply chains have been shaken up so much already, and there were certain things that we would have never seen or would have never done if the COVID crisis hadn't hit. So in a way, it served as a dress rehearsal for similar disruptions due to extreme climate events. So I think there's both of those opportunities in here. On the one hand, to actually enact change for that we already know we want to see, but we could never do it because the system was so set in its ways, so rigid, so we couldn't really get in there. But the other one is also that we can use each and every one of those crises to get prepared for the next one. But in order to do that, we need to be aware that there will be a next one, most likely, and that very likely it will be soon, because otherwise I don't think we're in the right mindset to actually learn from it. So this is the first part, and that was the longest part of what I wanted to talk about. There's three parts. The second part now is now that we have contextualized that age that we're living in a little bit. The question is what's gonna happen in 2022. And recently I was asked to write a blog for Alliance Manchester Business School, where I'm working, where they were bringing together several of our colleagues who have research in that field to say what will happen in 2022. And my guesstimation there is that actually, because in 2022 those two crises, COVID and the climate crisis, overlap very, very strongly, I actually think that there will be two types of quite drastic changes to some companies and some industries. And particularly the ones that are actually at the intersection of both of those crises, where both crises are putting pressure on them. So remember the pressure that we've seen before in that image that I showed you of the landscape pressing down on the normal practices and how they open up for change. So I actually think that some of the companies that are most affected by COVID and climate change, so for instance, the airline, travel industry, tourism in general, will actually see two things. On the one hand, to have some companies, even very mature companies, going out of business, going into bankruptcy. But also, I think the other response will be that there will be disruptive business model innovation, very disruptive innovation of what those companies think their core business is and should be, because they're put under so much pressure through those two crises. So this is about the business models, but I think then there's also the question about our practices. So not just on the overall organizational level, but on our individual managerial practices level. And that's another blog I did just recently for Forbes. And the idea there was, well, now that we do have, once again, that intersection between COVID and climate change, well, we can use that once again also in order to innovate our managerial practices. And some examples that I gave there are things that you probably know very well, like the move from linear supply chain management to circular supply chain management. So that whole topic of circular economy as one example, but also a little bit more fancy ones that many people can't really believe in yet. So this shift from managerial practices that are geared towards growing, always growing, towards degrowth, or rather towards optimum size. So that might be something that many people find much more difficult even to get their head around. But these are just two examples of what I think is a shift that we will see much more strongly within the next 5 to 10 years. And because I think we are exactly in that world right now, where I saw very kindly you were holding up the second edition of my textbook there. So this is from the first chapter, that it seems quite clear that we're not living in that old world anymore, where you could get away with pure profit maximization, shareholders first, make waste supply chains, all of those things that we have long criticized, where this is not what you can keep doing because it doesn't fit into our world anymore. But we're not yet right there in that kind of new world, if you want to call it that. You can call it many different things, where those practices actually have been replaced entirely by a very different way of managing. So a circular way of managing, stakeholder value maximization management, a management for optimum size and degrowth. So all of those things that we still think are quite fancy and new will at this point in time have normalized, because otherwise, if they haven't been normalized, well, we're in big trouble, because we keep producing the same problems that we already have and which are making the crisis that we're living right now. So we are somewhere in between. We're in that trench right now in this transition world. So I think we still need a little bit of kind of orientation and idea generation to see what could that new world actually look like, in which we do management very differently. And one of the central things that I was trying to do in the book was to outline a couple of very basic shifts that we could go through. So currently, if you think about marketing, for instance, the main idea there is to sell more most of the times. So we're fueling consumption, but of course we know all of the negative consequences of overconsumption. We know about the waste islands. We know about excessive energy use and the related CO2 issues. We know about the personal health problems when you're getting addicted to consumption. So it's not a good thing. So the idea would then be, how can we move away as marketeers, as the ones who sit at the intersection between the company and society? How can we move away from just fueling consumption, selling more, and fueling consumerism, towards actually thinking about how can we help with what we are best at in our company to enable well-being? And I mean as much personal well-being, human well-being, as also planetary well-being, because that's the very intersection. So how can we move, for instance, in financial management? How could we change financial management practices away from always looking at how has our market share grown, how have the respective revenues grown, how has our margin grown, towards, well, and at the same time, how much has our environmental impact grown, towards how can we actually possibly degrow to a size or stay at a certain size that we think is the best size for society and for the planet. How could we move away from greed, saying, okay, we always need more, and now in this case in financial sense, and also greed in the sense of personal wealth, to a sufficiency mindset, to say, okay, now I've got enough. I've got a watch, I don't need a second watch. I'm taking the bus, so I don't need a car. I've got healthy food, so why would I need to go to a very fancy restaurant, where I don't even like the food, but I'm doing it for prestige reasons. So how can we make a move like this? So, and I don't want to go on forever with those examples. I have a couple of more slides with those kind of examples. So I'll just mention them, and maybe you pick up some of them in the discussion so that we can go deeper. So how can we move possibly beyond individual ownership onto collective access and sharing? So think about the big movement we had a while ago to move towards bike sharing. Well, probably more pronounced in China, for instance, but also it's a global phenomenon. So that of course reduces at least the environmental impact of the use, and it reduces the idle time of the things that we have in our life, and which means, because they're not idle, because a bicycle not just standing in my shed, also the environmental impact per use becomes slower, because I have the same environmental impact for producing that bike just once, and every time I use it, the impact per use goes lower, and we are back getting more sustainable. How could we move beyond competition, just trying to beat the competition, towards actually thinking, how can we pool our resources if we're in the same industry, and collaborate in order to solve some of those global issues that we have? We already talked about this move from that linearity in supply chain management, from take, make, waste, to a circular, more cradle-to-cradle approach. How can we, and that's probably the biggest one, how can we overall move away from a net negative impact on the planet, where we're just saying, okay, now we've got a less bad impact, towards a restorative, towards a positive impact. I heard a really interesting example the other day about aquaculture in the open sea, and particularly about cultivating seaweed as for food purposes, because usually aquaculture is very unsustainable, because it does basically pollute, because of the density of the livestock that we have in there. It pollutes the water much more than it contributes to the ecosystem. While that seaweed farming, according to that report, is actually restorative. So it helps to clean up the water. It provides breeding ground for important sea species, and so on. So how can we make that move more widely? It's not talking about seaweed, but about any kind of organization that we have. How can we move from doing less bad towards actually restoring to doing something good overall as the output of our organization? So, and that of course comes to the next point, from exploitation to resource regeneration. And there's also a need then to move from that obsession with leadership, where we're saying like everybody needs to be a leader, towards some kind of more healthy mixture of full leading. I call it. It's a strange word, I know, but there was nothing in the dictionary that would really capture it. This idea that if everybody was a leader, well, nothing would happen anyway, because there's nobody who follows. So getting towards that idea also, that we move not necessarily away from globalization entirely, but that we're balancing it more with a very healthy localization. So those movements towards local production and consumption are really good examples there. And then the idea overall, and I've stolen that term here, economistic versus humanistic, from my good friend Michael Pearson, who does a lot of research on humanistic management, to how can we actually change management practices to from that idea that they have to be good for the economic dimension, financial dimension, towards first having them aligned with a positive social impact on human beings. So how can we move from economistic to humanistic management? Good. So I just have two more of them, so we'll just mention them for the purpose of discussion if somebody wants to tap into them later. So this also means that we cannot be all be winners in that kind of new economy, because we need to find niches so winners in the economic way, and winners in the sense of we have the best standard practice for something, because we need more diversity in the way that we manage business and management. And what Ulpiana said there earlier on about resilience is very, very relevant here, because the more diversity we have in the way we manage, the more different styles and practices of management we've got, with different contributions, social, economic, environmental contributions, the more resilient we are, because if a crisis hits, it will affect some part of those practices more than others. So that means some of them actually remain stable, and it gives the other ones a space to bounce back. And then finally, it is about from doing the best for my business, to say, okay, I need my business to thrive. And often if you look at the public discourse, there's this, people say, okay, but this would be bad for business. I actually would suppose that or propose that, how about we move away from thinking what's best for business towards thinking what's the best thing my business could do. So it doesn't mean that we should go against business, but rather, instead of making the business the ultimate purpose, to think how can a business actually, or how can that particular business actually be good for society and the planet. And these are just a couple of the standard ones, all related to what your impact is. So I don't want to keep going forever with that long list. I would like to open up a discussion and hear what you folks think about the points I was trying to make here. And I really like this graffiti here. You've seen all of what I've had in that last part of the presentation was Banksy theme, so the street artist from the UK you might have heard about. And that's one which is here in Manchester. Which always makes me think and sometimes laugh, because for me it means all of those shifts that are just proposed there, they might seem some of them might seem very outrageous, or you might say it's just not feasible, or you don't see how that works. But in a way, it is this idea that, like, laugh now, but one day we'll be in charge. Laugh now, but maybe, or very likely, one day that kind of practice, that kind of shift will be what's normal. So from there, I would log out. I've got not logging out, but I will stop the presentation. I've got no idea how long I've been going. Hopefully it's close to your expectations, and would be great if we could have a little discussion about what I just presented.
You were perfectly on time, so just thank you, and let's see if there's someone that have any questions. Of course in Italian I can translate it to you. Quindi se ci sono delle domande da qua, piuttosto che da casa. Oliver, I just ask you just to stop
yes.
sharing your screen. Thank you.
Done.
Monitoriamo anche la chat, ovviamente. Una Claudio.
Allora, molte grazie per la relazione, secondo me molto sconvolgente, per me almeno. Ecco, se vuoi tradurre magari. Giusto, c'è ragione. Allora, la mia domanda è questa, la dico con un aneddoto. Avevo una macchina per lavorare del materiale ferroso, comprata 10 anni fa. Questa macchina, negli ultimi anni, aveva sempre più problemi, aveva sempre delle crisi sempre più ricorrenti. Dovevamo scegliere se fare un revamping oppure cambiare la macchina. Ecco. Vorrei chiedere al professore se questa transizione da un vecchio, noi adesso siamo nella transizione, al nuovo, questo nuovo che lui delinea è un qualcosa più simile alla sostituzione della macchina vecchia, cioè buttiamo via la vecchia macchina e ne mettiamo una nuova, quindi un sistema completamente nuovo, oppure quello che accadrà sarà una risistemazione del vecchio sistema, sarà un revamping. Io ho l'impressione che quella che propone lui sia una sostituzione del vecchio, perché quando lui ha scritto from growth to degrowth for the optimum size è un messaggio fortissimo. Cioè, se noi ci andiamo indietro qua a dire dalla crescita alla decrescita, che è una parola, una bestemmia in Italia, questa cosa qua, ma anch'io non condivido, peraltro, per l'ottimale, è un messaggio fortissimo che ha dato lui. Quindi vorrei chiedere se lui è consapevole che secondo me la sua è proprio la macchina la buttiamo via e la...
So Claudio, thanks you a lot for your presentation. He uses a term in Italian that in English would be astonished. We were.
I wanted to ask you about that because I got the basic gist there, but I want to really know about the meaning.
He made just an example on what is his experience, just in order to understand better what was your message in the presentation. So he's operating in the steel industry. And he makes the example of when he, some times ago, he had a machinery that he had some problems because it was quite old. And at one point, he was wondering if was the
repair
case
it or replace it, yeah.
Exactly. So to repair or to make totally a new process and to buy a new one. So it's the same thing that he wanted to ask you with your vision, with what you were describing us today, because you made, he said, a very strong affirmation from growth to the growth. That is a word that here in Italy doesn't sound so good. The growth.
It doesn't sound good anywhere, I think.
So he asked you if your vision is more about like leaving the old model and constructing a totally new one, or repair in somehow the old one with new issues and new perspectives.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I'm actually astonished that I got most of it. Probably it's my Spanish that helps a lot with understanding the Italian. So thanks for clarification again, Ulpiana, as well. So if you asked what I wanted to do, I would like to replace the machine. If you ask me what we can do, I don't think repairing the old machine is the right way either. But so we could repair it, of course, at least temporarily. The problem is just that the machine gives us the wrong things. The machine causes us problems globally. So if we repair it and we make it the same machine that we have, so the degrowth is a really great example because it's so simple. We do have a certain environmental capacity on that planet. We have a certain number of people with their respective practices that the planet can carry. And we have a certain size or type of economy that can serve that number of people that we have on the planet. So that means there's a certain limit. And the problem is actually that because of the environmental problems that we're causing, the limit goes down. So how many people and how much economy our planet can carry is getting smaller. So that means we cannot keep growing forever. So if we repair the growth machine, well, we know we're not going to be here much longer, or the machine's just gonna fall apart naturally because it's out of sync with everything around it. So what can we do? I think this image that I ask you to reflect on is a very helpful one, because what you saw in the middle, this kind of establishment, what Frank Giles calls the regime, I think this is the machine. If the machine is working normally, you have all of those things just in line. They're just very, very smoothly running through time from left to right, and you don't see any disturbance. But if it's opened up and we have that chaos, as you said before, all of a sudden there's certain things, parts of that are so broken that there needs to be an alternative. And this is when those kind of new practices that we already have, so degrowth, is something that actually is practiced in certain circumstances, in certain companies, in certain situations. So we already have degrowth practices. They're just something very exotic. They're just in the niche for now. So if we actually have the growth paradigm very, very thoroughly broken because of the crisis, it might be where we can fix part of the machine and make it partly a new machine, where some part of it works differently. So my short answer is this: I don't think we can throw away the entire machine. I don't think we should repair the machine that we had before either, but I think we should gradually, and that's the, I think the realistic thing, gradually replace the parts of that machine until overall it has become a new one. I think this is where the only thing we can do really.
It's in line with what we are trying and to do with the companies of the association and the topic of the seminar today, because they are part of that niche in somehow, Oliver, and they foster us and me in particular to think about something different that goes also beyond the sustainability. Ok, they are asking me just to translate your answer. L'ho dato per scontato, scusate, perché insomma, siccome il suo intervento era in inglese, no, in poche parole la risposta di Oliver, io, fosse per me, ovviamente preferirei buttare via la vecchia macchina e prenderne una nuova. Però questo ovviamente non è possibile, ma del resto non è una soluzione neanche riparare la vecchia, non è una soluzione riparare la vecchia perché abbiamo certi limiti che impedirebbero l'utilizzo di questa nuova, cioè di questa macchina, diciamo, riparata. E allora ha fatto questo esempio che la cosa molto più realistica, diciamo, che può accadere è quella di prendere parte per parte di questa macchina e rinnovarla per arrivare poi alla fine, no, a rinnovarla tutta. Quindi questa è un po' è stata un po' il succo della sua risposta. E sto cercando invece di allinearci perché quello che poi andiamo a presentare oggi è il progetto dell'Associazione sulla Felicità, si colloca esattamente in quella nicchia e in quel doing good through business, no? che lui prima citava e che cerchiamo di, appunto, per un pezzettino rinnovare e sostituire. So yes, I just wanted to underline the fact that we are totally in line with what we are doing. We are trying with this happiness research to look forward to maybe change a small part of this machine. And let's see how it can be useful for this niche that is now looking for the perspective that is in line with yours. I'm asking also for other questions, maybe altre domande, anche online, riusciamo a leggerle senza problemi. In italiano sicuramente li traduco io senza problemi. Oppure anche in spagnolo. Also in Spanish, right, Oliver? Mm-hmm. You have a fluent Spanish, so...
I actually got most of what had been said before in Italian, so I don't think you need to translate the entire thing. I can just double check if I understood it correctly.
Benissimo. Claudio says that it's really satisfied with your answer.
Oh, thank you.
Non è ovviamente qualsiasi cosa, anche magari che non è strettamente collegato a quello che ha detto e che ha... Ok, Fabio is asking you something.
Okay, first of all, Oliver, thank you very much for your... Okay, okay, I'll do in English and then in Italian, okay, if you don't mind. Okay, so thank you very much for your presentation. So you were talking about transition to a new world, right? And I guess that this entails not only corporate practices, but also a new mindset, both from the corporate perspective and also from stakeholder perspective, okay? And so do you think that like the public intervention could play a major role in this? And I'm also referring to like academia and public institution, governments, because of course we have target like for 2030 about sustainability, but in the end are private corporations that should take action. So you think that public intervention can actually like foster this transition, or private corporations should like be in the first line?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll do that in Italian now. Quindi in sostanza io ho chiesto che, siccome lui ha parlato di una transizione verso un nuovo mondo, in che modo l'intervento pubblico, sia di istituzioni sovranazionali che anche banalmente le istituzioni pubbliche di insegnamento come l'università, può effettivamente sostenere questa transizione, perché questa transizione, da come ho capito, non riguarda solo delle pratiche di management, ma anche proprio un nuovo mindset che devono adottare sia le aziende, ma anche gli stakeholder, fornitori, clienti e quant'altro. Ok.
Yeah. So it's a question I hear very often. This, like, who should make the change? Who should be responsible for the change? Or what is the role? Is it either government or corporations? I think it actually it's not that easy. I think so what I'm trying to do is to focus on the practices. So how does financial management work, for instance? How do we set targets if we stay in that degrowth area? If we're targeting a certain optimum size, or maybe even growing our degrowing our business. And I want to give you an example that two of the big petroleum companies here in the UK just recently have made very explicit and very clear commitments of how they want to degrow their petroleum business. And they have to, because the UK government is phasing out any kind of fuel-driven cars and going entirely to the electric cars by 2030, I believe. So we cannot really separate it out. Of course, there's a government element there, because those companies would never have started to reorganize their financial management around indicators. So moving from indicators for growing their petroleum business. So I want to have more gas stations. I want to have more people using fuel, towards the opposite one. How can we now actually degrow our petroleum-based business? So one thing that they came up based on that kind of degrowth financial indicators was actually to now use their network of gas stations around the UK in order to make them electric vehicle charging stations. So they keep the same infrastructure. Basically, the petroleum business almost disappears or stays as kind of a niche business of theirs, and they're moving on to a different kind of energy. In this case, hopefully a more type of sustainable energy and more sustainable mobility. So both of them obviously play a role, and we see how important the government intervention has been in that example. But at the same time, the target thing, what we want to change is practices. We want people, not in companies, but private people, to use electric vehicles. So a very drastic change in the underlying technology of our mobility practices. But that, of course, connects over to the financial management practices, where the companies that used to help to fuel petroleum-driven gas to degrow the petroleum business in order to be able to actually serve that EV type of fuel need. So an internal financial management practice. But of course, it also goes over to the governmental practices of how do I set public policies? How do I make laws? And what kind of laws come out of it? So I think it's very hard to disentangle those. I think they come together. So typically how I'm trying to tackle this is to think, what is the target practice I want to change? And which other practices in other sectors actually connect to that target practice? And how do these practices need to change in order to that, so that target practice changes? In this case, the use of gas, petroleum-based vehicles. So that's typically how I would respond to that. Sorry for a horribly long answer to a very simple question. Problems I don't have a simple answer.
Thank you. Any other question? Altre domande? Curiosità? Sarebbe troppo lunga. Preferisco fare un'altra domanda, poi magari. Sì, però aspetta che ti sto lontano, ma...
Ok, la domanda è questa. L'altro giorno mi sono imbattuto in un po' di paper di qualche anno fa, cioè di alcuni articoli di alcuni anni fa, che parlano di deep adaptation, che parlano di questo adattamento profondo dei noi esseri umani di fronte alla tragedia imminente. Sono una visione, come dire, tragica come dire, dell'evoluzione umana. E Cioè, questa raffigurazione potrebbe aiutare davvero il cambiamento. Cioè, mi chiedo se davvero un modo così tragico di vedere, come dire, il fine dell'umanità possa essere utile al cambiamento. Non so se have you understood something?
Yeah, I think I got the basic gist about the kind of depth of the change that we need in human nature, and
but there are some scholars that are talking about this kind of deep adaptation. So as human beings, we are in front of the tragedy. The tragedy is near us, the end, basically, more or less. But do you think this kind of vision could help to change some way? I don't know. Is something that I was thinking about it during your lecture, basically, because you have this kind of urgent approach.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know enough context, I think, to be really spot on and connect very well to what you were saying just now, but I will try. I think this and I think you caught that very well, that there's an urgency in the way how I present it, and generally as a human being, I feel that urgency. I'm often very despaired about where we are as human beings, and every one of us is as a consequence. I've seen recently, so already about 30, 40 years, there's this discussion about strong versus weak sustainability. So should we have a very radical stance towards the changes that we make, so strong sustainability, or should we have a kind of more integrative, conciliatory, easygoing stance towards sustainability, where we're saying, oh, everything is going to be fine, we're just gonna make a couple of changes, and it's basically going to fix itself. So in the last 5 years, I've seen that more and more people actually move from that easygoing, weak sustainability to a much more strong sustainability, much more radical sustainability stance. And I think part of the reason for that is really that tragedy that you mentioned. It is much closer to us. So you folks in Italy, I mean, Modena probably not necessarily, but in other places in Italy, I think you're at the forefront of the global refugee crisis with what is happening in the Mediterranean. For instance, we in the UK have it here with people drowning in the Channel. It's something that's quite literally so much closer to home. So I think we feel the tragedy. I think we feel the problems much more now. And I think the best example is really COVID, because there it did affect, and it does affect our lives. The tragedy is right here. We have lost people. We are not able to live as we used to live, and we're not able to do the things that we want to do. And there is so much tragedy in our life, and I think this is part of the opportunity that we are in right now with the COVID crisis, but also with all of the other crises to come, that people will be more open to change because they feel themselves how urgent it is that something happens. It's not and I don't mean that in any disrespectful way. So it's not children in Africa starving. It's not an abstract somebody else somewhere far away whom we don't see, who we don't touch, with whom we cannot really relate. It is happening right now, right here. And I think that makes the big difference, to feel that tragedy right in front of us, to see it, to live it ourselves. That opens up opportunities for change as well.
Thank you. Claudio? Yes, Claudio just wanted to thank you again, and yes, you...
Okay, many thanks for your speech, for your answers, very deep. I hope to meet you again in the flesh.
That would be great, yeah.
Thank you really much. I hope to applaud to Professor Haas.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay, many thanks.
Oliver, of course, the other presentation, our presentation on the research will be, sorry, in Italian, but yeah. I'm quite sure we will have the chance to speak about it. And as far as we are also trying to get it published in English, of course, it will be a pleasure to share it with you. So I'm really sorry for the second part. So feel free.
That's all good. I would just stay maybe a little bit longer and listen in. And if I notice that I'm entirely lost, I will probably just click myself out. But thank you so much once again, everybody, for having me. It's a genuine pleasure, and it would be great to meet you in person one day. And as shown before on the slides, feel free to be in touch. Connect to me on LinkedIn if you want to continue the conversation, or comment on the things we have on my YouTube channel. So it would be really good to be in touch.